Have you ever walked away from an argument with your husband and thought to yourself, how did that conversation end up there? You started by trying to explain something simple, something that hurt you, but somehow the conversation flipped and suddenly you were the one defending yourself. And afterward, you were left wondering, did I just explain that so poorly? Did I misunderstand what just happened? If you've experienced that feeling, I want to start with something very important. You're not crazy. There is a reason arguments with narcissistic personalities often feel completely impossible to resolve. And later in this video, I'm going to explain something that many people suddenly realize after years of confusion. Arguments with narcissists tend to follow a very predictable pattern. And once you recognize that pattern, you begin to understand why conversations that should take 5 minutes can suddenly spiral into hours of confusion. One of the most painful experiences in relationships like this is the feeling of never being heard. We hear that time and time again in our private coaching. You enter the conversation calmly. You try to explain something that made you feel. You're not attacking. You're not yelling. You're simply trying to repair the relationship. But within minutes, the conversation becomes chaotic. Suddenly, you're being accused of things that you never said. Past issues are brought up into the conversation, and your intentions are questioned. And instead of resolving the actual problem, you feel like you're standing in the middle of an emotional fog. Many thoughtful women eventually begin asking themselves, why does every disagreement turn into this? Let me ask you something. Have you ever gone into a conversation determined to stay calm, only to find yourself apologizing at the end of the argument, even though you originally felt hurt? If that experience feels familiar, you're not alone. It's one of the most common dynamics in relationships where narcissistic patterns are present. Let me describe a situation many women recognize. You approach your husband and say something like, hey, when that thing happened earlier, it bothered me and it hurt my feelings. At first, he may appear calm, but within minutes, the conversation shifts. Perhaps he'll say, you're too sensitive, or you're always blowing things out of proportion. Or suddenly he brings up something that you did months ago and makes that the point of the conversation. So now the conversation is no longer about the issue that you brought up. You find yourself on your back foot trying to defend your character instead of actually getting resolution of the thing where we started. And somewhere in the middle of the argument, you realize the original problem has completely disappeared off the table. One of the key reasons these arguments feel so confusing with men with narcissistic tendencies is that disagreement feels to them like a personal threat. When someone has a fragile sense of self underneath their confidence, even mild feedback can feel like humiliation. So instead of engaging with you and processing the actual concern, his nervous system shifts into defense. And that defense can show up in several predictable ways. Deflection is one, blame shifting is another, gaslighting is a very common other one. And of course, the turning the conversation back towards the other person. Because for him, the goal becomes protecting his ego, not resolving the issue. Now, here's the part that many people don't realize. And once you see this, arguments with narcissistic people, men, start making much more sense. See, the argument that you think you're having is often not the argument they believe they are having. Right? You may be trying to repair the relationship or a breach in the relationship, but from their perspective, the conversation is feeling like an attack on their identity. So instead of solving the problem, instead of joining you to solve the problem, his mind shifts towards winning the interaction. Which is why these conversations can suddenly become about who's right and shifting blame or proving the other person wrong. Because protecting the ego becomes more important than repairing the relationship for him. So stay with me here, because the next part explains why so many thoughtful people end up feeling exhausted after these conversations. See, empathetic partners often respond to conflict by trying harder. Right? You're interested in trust and connection and bonding in the relationship. And so you try to explain things more clearly to kind of close the gap. And you try to stay calm and you try to be reasonable. And you see, these instincts are healthy in a balanced relationship, but they can unintentionally keep the argument going longer in relationship with a person with narcissist traits. Because the empath keeps trying to solve the problem while the narcissistic partner keeps trying to protect their ego. And so the conversation slowly turns into this emotional gridlock. Now, here's something important to understand. Arguments with narcissists often feel impossible because their goal is not resolution. His goal is self-protection. Do you see the difference? Over time, experiencing this dynamic repeatedly can be deeply exhausting for you. You begin questioning your memory, your communication. Am I really that bad at talking? Even your own emotional reactions you start second guessing. But what many people eventually realize is this. The confusion they feel during these arguments is not a reflection of their intelligence or their skill in communication. It's the result of participating in a conversation where two people are playing completely different psychological games. One person is seeking understanding, the other is protecting their identity. Understanding this dynamic can bring a surprising amount of relief, because it helps to explain something many thoughtful partners struggle with. You cannot resolve an argument with someone who's not actually trying to resolve the argument. You can only decide how you want to respond to that dynamic. Now, I'm curious about something. How many of you have experienced a conversation where the original issue completely disappeared off the table and suddenly you were the one on your back foot defending yourself? If that experience feels familiar, you can simply write "that happens to me" in the comments. You might also want to read through some of the other comments, because many people discover they're not alone in what they've been experiencing. Now, if you'd like thoughtful guidance on navigating relationships like this, while at the same time protecting your emotional well-being, you can join our Detox Your Marriage community using the link below. And if this video helped bring clarity to your situation, subscribe to the channel, click the like button, because the more you understand these patterns, the more freedom you begin to experience in life.